Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is November 9, 2025. The time 4 p.m. PDT. Welcome, one and all. Today, I'm going to be talking about the recent triumph of the Los Angeles Dodgers, 2025 World Series champions. Yes, in 7 games. And I notice Paul Croce says, only 2 cheers? Yes, not 3 cheers. You picked up that subtlety because I'm holding back 1 cheer for the dark history upon which the Dodgers franchise was built upon. And I'm not talking just about Native American peoples, right? I'm talking about Mexicans. I'm talking about Black people, Negroes. And of course, I'm talking about the yeller people, my people, right? And there's a group. It's a multi-ethnic group, but it's largely of Russian, Ukrainian, what's now Ukraine, Eastern European, but mostly immigrant stock Jews from that area, the Pale with a capital P, the phrase beyond the pale, the Russian Pale, the ghetto, in other words. And this is a term that was coined by, I guess he's a journalist, Walter Sheridan. Says, and that is in reference to this particular cohort of movers and shakers who shaped the post-war period in American and world history up to 2025, to the present time. And it's the super mob who's also in the shadows of these current personality-driven, YouTube celebrity-driven fake fight between Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens and Mark Levin and other assorted individuals who are inserting themselves as tube celebrities for a larger historical discussion that's been occluded, obscured, put to the sidelines. So it's the responsibility of Professor Hamamoto to bring the history back front and center to this discussion, because the future of the world civilization is dependent upon understanding this deep history. And toward that end, I have turned back to a really important piece of work. I think it's out of print now because I had to buy a second copy. I couldn't find my original copy. I used to teach out, well, not teach out of the book. I prepared at least 2 or 3 lectures based upon this incredible study of the super mob that runs post-war America. And I've been talking about them for the past several months in a row. I'm talking about the fixers, some of the mockers, some of the tough guys, the hard guys who made Hollywood, the entertainment business, the music business. We talked about Lou Wasserman, Dr. Jules Stein, MCA, and the mob, and how they created their man, Ronald Reagan, right? I've been talking about this, but encapsulated in all this history of the post-war period and the current crisis, because they're involved, believe me, at the highest level of the national, that is U.S. national, and world economy. And it's going to be the super mob that's going to be instrumental in trying to convince the larger American public that this rug pull, this economic rug pull that's about to be effected is going to be good for us. And that's why we're talking about crypto and all these other subsidiary or secondary forms of exchange that are going to be implemented, not at our request, not because of our political will, but because they decided the super mob, the super class, has decided that they have to unload the bad debt on not just Americans anymore, because we've been living with inflation continuously since really the end of World War II, but they're going to offload it to the entire world. And that's what's underlying the whole crypto. And I'm using crypto in a generic sense, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Who are some of the key players of the super mob? And what in the heck do they have to do with the LA Doyers? I'll answer, or at least attempt to answer, all these questions over the next 60 to 90 minutes. And by the way, I'm not picking on any one group, because whatever society you want to look at, you got criminality. Right? It just so happens it's the super mob that's in charge right now. And there's going to be some sort of mob in place, wherever you look into the future, in the past, in the present, whatever society you want to look at. Indeed, even with our own American society, I've written an entire book called Servitors of Empire, which focuses only on yellow criminals. I called it here in this book Asian America, but I've discarded that term. I'm using the term yellow because it has stronger and more accurate and universal relevance. After all, the Chinese people in China refer to themselves as Huang. There's a Yalu River, Huangpo. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing it. And they've written classically about the Yellow Emperor. You get the point here. And instead, the orthodoxy in the government, in academia, they came up with this weird term called Asian America to obscure the subversive elements of this analysis, the yellow analysis. All right. So, as I've alluded to, I had to buy a copy of Super Mob by Gus Russo. By his name, I assume he's Italian American. He's a historian / journalist. And I'd say he's more leaning towards the side of historians. All this is meticulously documented here. Unfortunately, it's out of print. So I had to pay a lot of money to get a used copy because I can't find the original one I had that I bought years ago that I used in my courses to talk about the super mob and the dispossession of my people. All right, we'll get to that in a moment. And not just my people, the yellows, Japanese American, or Nikkei, as I prefer them to be called, but also of the, just prior to that, the Mexican people who were targeted and removed and relocated from their barrio. It's known as Chavez Ravine, and still Dodger Stadium is referred to interchangeably as Chavez Ravine. And there's a dark history behind it, as we will explore here. But before we do that, before I get down into the dark side, the one cheer that I'm reserving, I'm holding it back. And by the way, when I see a yellow man who's straight, not gay, because Supermob only allows homosexual yellow men out there, just like Supermob likes to dress black men in dresses and to cross-dress. Supermob only allows yellow men who are homosexual. George Takei. is the prime example. He was set up in order to promote gay rights, just like I was recruited by Supermob, the Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Southern California. I was recruited to try to queer so-called Asian American people by the Annenberg School by a guy named Professor Larry Gross. Yes, he is gross. Not because he's Canadian, but he's a Canadian agent. He has an endowed chair at Annenberg. And if you don't know the name Annenberg, then you have to read Super Mob or any mob history. Annenberg is up there. And the Annenberg family is a really good study on how people who come from the shtetl, that is from the Pale of Russia, because of the pogroms and the systemic persecution that we now call anti-Semitism, how they can come to the New World, America, Southern California in particular, the home of the LA Doyers, and create an empire of their own. By the way, that's the title of a very good book by Neil Gabler called An Empire of Their Own. And it's about Hollywood Jews who are they're super mob, who created the film industry. And by extension, the music industry and the sports industry. You got a professional sports. And by that, maybe I'll touch a little bit upon online gambling. There's a whole revolution in gambling going on right now, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have to tell you. So we can go really, really deep in the coming weeks. But I'll start with the recent championship. This makes 2 in a row. They're going to go for a 3. The Dodgers. The recent victory of the Doyers. This is what Latino people, if you're out from outside the region, Los Angeles is a huge Mexican population, Mexican American, Latino, right? Not just Mexican origin, but other Latin American countries. And so and that's their team. Their team is the Dodgers. Just like for yellow people, especially of my generation, that's our team. We grew up dreaming, fantasizing of being on the Los Angeles Doyers, or in my case, the Dodgers. And I played baseball in what was called CYC, Community Youth Council, which was sponsored by local Nisei or Nikkei-owned businesses, because we had a league of our own. Because we're talking about segregation, you understand that? White baseball, brown baseball, yellow baseball. There were even in the early days of baseball, there were Jewish teams, only Jews, or Jewish basketball. It was a different time, a different place. And so you're telling me, well, that was yesterday. What about 2025? We're beyond that. We're in the post-racial era. Oh, really? Is that a fact? I guess my goal today is to show you that you be wrong. All right. But before we get into that, let's take and it's probably still fresh in your mind, but let's take a look at our man, Ohtani Shohei. Speaking to the crowd, the assembled crowd in the post-victory speech to not just to those present, but people around the world, including Japan. Here's Ohtani.
I want to say that I'm so proud of this team, and then I want to say you guys are the greatest fans in the world. And then I'm ready to get another ring next year. Let's go.
Without further ado, folks, Dodger fan.
Hello.
There you go. I think his deal's worth something like 700 million. He was the highest paid so far athlete of any sport in the world. That's Ohtani Shohei. You know the story. You know the hype behind it. And he was heckled in Toronto, supposedly because he didn't choose to go there. He decided to go to Los Angeles. Why did he want to go to LA instead of Toronto? Well, Los Angeles has a whole history of yellow baseball. Do you understand? There's a whole historical process behind Ohtani, Yamamoto, Sasaki. Before that, Nomo. And by the way, that's just the Dodgers. We're talking about people like this says Ichiro. Ichiro. This is katakana. Seattle Mariners. It's Japanese owned, by the way. And I remember when the ownership was changing hands up in Seattle, people said, we can't have foreigners owning American baseball. Just like they told Ohtani, we don't want you. We can't have foreigners owning American baseball. There was discussion about that. Not discussion, it was a passionate, ravenous, in some quarters, opposition. Just like in the 1980s when you had people taking sledgehammers to Toyotas and Hondas because they were blaming the globalist destruction of the U.S. manufacturing sector, specifically automobiles, on the perennial enemy, the yellow man. Especially for the generation of those, the older people who had experienced World War II. Right. But we're in different times now. So, but we're not out of danger. In fact, we are poised on the precipice of economic meltdown unless we figure out some of these deeper issues relating to the super mob. And don't get fixated on its spokespersons like Mark Nevin or who were some of these other characters that started Laura Loomer. Oh my gosh. I can't even take her seriously. But they have emerged with a vengeance. And this generation of quote unquote pro-Israel is quite different from those that I knew back in the day, because most of my friends, my associates, my professors were staunchly anti-Zionist. They would definitely be stand in opposition to what's going on right now. Okay. I don't know I kind of do know what happened. There was a takeover of political Zionism by certain forces that we're going to talk about next week, by the way. Leo Zagami's making a return visit talking about his new book on Frankism. Frankenstein is right, the reanimated corpse, the Sabbatean peoples, right? So that's going to be an interesting discussion. You'll want to join us for that one. Press the subscription button so that you can get all your notifications. So I mentioned at the outset, our brown brothers, right? Latinos, as they are called in the academic world. I want to call them brown, just like I want to call Asian people yellow, and I want to call African Americans black people. All right. Chavez Ravine was a settlement in East Los Angeles, up in the foothills. There was but it was nothing fancy, but it was their home. You might call it a shanty town. They had plumbing and certain amenities, but it wasn't deluxe that you'd find in other parts of Los Angeles. But it so happened that quote unquote developers had their eyes on that supposedly undeveloped land and they want to convert it to money. And they had to devise some sort of plan in order to remove hundreds of families from Chavez Ravine so that they can implement their plan. Does it sound familiar to you? Right? Yeah, it sounds like the Palisades fire to me. Except the difference is with the Palisades fire is that the super mob were behind it. Palisades fire, just like they were behind the so-called redevelopment of Chavez Ravine, which is now the site of Los Angeles Dodger Stadium. See how it connects? Well, maybe you don't see. Maybe we should take a little bit of a look at some video of Chavez Ravine as it was back in those days. And I was around when the mass removal of a targeted community, in this case Mexicans, was coming down. I watched it live on television, on the television news, KTLA.
Would have been a shoo-in in 1953. After this was reported to the press, the Times and other paper crusading against the mayor, Bowen was wiped out, and the new mayor, Norris Polson, came in and started the negotiations to turn the site, not back to the people, but to turn it over to Walter O'Malley and the Brooklyn Dodgers. We spent millions of dollars getting ready for it, and the Dodgers picked it up for just a fraction of that. It was just a tragedy for the people and for the city. It was the most hypocritical thing that could possibly happen. The city promising you a decent home.
For refusing to answer the questions of the House Un-American Activities Committee, Frank Wilkinson spent a year in jail. It was the beginning of Frank's own legal battle against the FBI, which had targeted Frank as part of a deliberate effort to destroy the nation's public housing programs.
Our lawsuit started in 1980, lasted 12 years. It cost Loeb and Loeb, the law firm who represented me, it cost them $1 million in pro bono money. It was an ACLU test case, and we finally won. Out of winning that, we get 132,000 pages on my life from 42 to 80. And in there is the story of Chavez Ravine.
See them trees over there?
Yeah.
This hill right there, knock it down, see? And the stadium.
And that piece is based, it's a really fine film, and it was based on the photographs, as you saw a little glimpse there of, I forgot the person's name, who documented those times. It's all gone now. And of course, you heard the bait and switch. By the way, that older gentleman that you saw being interviewed, that's Frank Wilkerson. And I met him. I got to meet. I didn't understand his historical importance when I met him. A friend of mine named Carl Boggs, who, by the way, introduced the Gramsci work, the prison notebooks, to the English speaking audience. Antonio Gramsci, we hear these people talking about, oh, that's cultural Marxism. They've never read it, but it's a common phrase that people like Jordan Peterson kind of toss around. But that was Carl Boggs. He's a friend of mine, and he took me to go see Frank Wilkinson, who was a 1930s type Grapes of Wrath, full blown old left communist. You understand? The new left communists were people who came up in the 60s, the people who trained and groomed people like Barack Obama, right? Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers Jr. Those are new leftists. The 1960s. I met one of the original old labor IWW, International Workers of the World type left. That was Frank Wilkerson, who was working for the people, in this case Mexicans, who were promised public housing, and of course they just handed instead, for pennies on the dollar, the property to one of the top guys of the Irish mafia, Walter O'Malley. Bait and switch, just like Pacific Palisades. Oh, we're going to do public housing for all the quote unquote unhoused people of Los Angeles. They're not going to do nothing. They're going to develop that. They're going to have beautiful Pacific Ocean vistas, views for only the super wealthy. So don't blame it on the Chinamen. These are the super mobs that are doing it right now. And if you're blaming it on the Chinaman, you're probably some IDF agent. Because their tactic is always to put the knife in someone else's hand. So we're done with that. That's why I do these shows, to check the bullshit that's going down. The yellow man is not going to be fucked over by the super mob no more. And you could even try to marry into the yellow people like Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan. That's only going to work on a limited basis. Because on a global level, there's, close to 2 billion of us. And we know the history. You understand? That's my role. That's my contribution. And I don't care. You can put this fake Chinese professor. There's this guy up there who calls himself Professor Chong, or I can't remember. And a friend of mine checked him out because they said, hey, there's a guy out there who is like stealing your act. And I said, well, I'm not doing an act. This is who I am. I am a University of California professor emeritus. That's who I am. This guy here was a high school teacher in China. He doesn't know about America. He's a Chinaman that probably super mob put out there because they need to negate Professor Hamamoto. I wasn't going to say anything about him, but apparently he's being positioned as the Chinese Nostradamus. So I thought I should say something. And when he shows up on the Alex Jones show, Alex Jones is going to say, I discovered him, just like he discovered, what's the guy, Ben Dickhead, the guy with the evil eyes, Candace Owens. And then he had, what's his name on, Russell Brand the other day. So you have to go through Alex Jones to get the anointing of the alternative group. So they'll be on that show. That imposter will be on that show at some point. See how this works? Right. You can't attack me head on because my mojo is spot on. So just create a duplicate, a simulation, a simulacrum, and then direct all the energy and the attention to that particular distraction. All right, so let's continue. Let me show you. I have to cue this up for you here.
To show
We'll get to that in a moment. A fellow brown person, I guess he's Mexican American. He's a muralista. Mexicans are associated with, Diego Rivera and Jose Orozco, the whole muralista movement. And I've been there. I've been to Coyoacan, Casa de Calo. Her husband was the famous Diego Rivera, who did all these murals for Rockefeller in the U.S. as well as in Mexico City. There's tons of. I think I've seen most of the collection. The Ministry of Education, even some train stops. Anyway, he's an important person. So there's a tradition of mural making. And this one Mexican American artist made a mural in Little Tokyo of one Ohtani Shohei. Here it is.
Ohtani is now towering over Little Tokyo. NBC4's Lauren Coronado shows us the mural that's bridging cultures here in LA and around the world.
We know fans have been raving about the mural before its formal unveiling, and today they showed up in their Dodger blue to commemorate the moment. From die-hard Dodger fans,
it's like the spark of the Dodgers,
to those visiting from Japan.
The greatest sportsman.
This was my idea of creating a piece that was all about unity, bridging cultures together.
Robert Vargas, the well-known artist from Boyle Heights, bridging cultures right here in LA's Little Tokyo, known as the largest official Japantown in the United States.
And the mural is actually kind of taken on a much broader meaning of just Angelino City pride.
It's a 150 by 60-foot display on the wall of the Miyako Hotel, just steps away from the Japanese American National Museum. It showcases the two-way superstar at the plate and on the mound, with an augmented reality element to it, too.
You point your camera phone after you scan the QR code to the wall, and then the image of Shohei actually animates, and he swings the bat, and then the smaller version of him pitching, he follows through. You hear the crack of the bat, you hear the roar of the crowd, and then you hear Vin Scully say, "It's time for Dodger baseball."
The unveiling comes a day before the Dodgers home opener, and as Ohtani denies involvement in the sports betting scandal surrounding his former interpreter. A criminal investigation now underway, but fans we talked with say they're looking ahead to the season.
I believe he's innocent, and just you have to be careful who you surround your circle with. Most definitely, because you just never know. We're excited to see what Ohtani has to bring to LA and the Dodgers.
To be a longtime Dodger fan, it's really good for the people. All the cultures get together and unite together, as one for LA.
An exciting kickoff ahead of the Dodgers home opener tomorrow, which we'll be at beginning at 4 a.m. on Today in LA. Reporting in Little Tokyo, I'm Lauren Coronado, NBC4 News.
Well, a tribute.
And that was last year. Ohtani just completed his second year here. 2 championships in a row, and he wants to go for number 3. So this is in the heart of Little Tokyo, which used to be the center of economic, cultural, business life for Japanese Americans, because as you might know, we, as being on the other side, we yellow people, of being on the non-white spectrum, right, along with the browns, which include the Mexicans, and the Negroes, black people, and for a time, even Jews were forced to live with the brown, the black, and the yellows because of residual anti-Semitism. No Jews living in certain parts of Los Angeles, old Los Angeles, out in Pasadena, for example. So when those restrictions were lifted, Jews were able to leave East Los Angeles, like where Chavez Ravine is now, and move out to the San Fernando Valley or to the west side. Whereas people like me had to stay in my own little segregated enclave which didn't bother me because LA is huge and everybody was in the same boat. Right. But that doesn't mean that we had equal opportunities here, right? And that includes in sports of all areas of human endeavor. You would think that we're dealing on an equal playing field, that it's a pure meritocracy sports. It's not the case, though, as we will see in a moment. I have ample material here to show you. For one thing, up until fairly recently, there was a system of inequality, economic, financial inequality built in to the business of Major League Baseball. And there's an individual who I want to take a few minutes to recognize right now. Say his name so that you will be compelled to look him up. And I have his book. I haven't read it yet. He's in the history book, not just in sports history, but in constitutional history. His influences, it has resonated in any number of different areas, right? You've heard the name Jackie Robinson, who was a Brooklyn Dodger, by the way. Branch Rickey, who was the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, broke the color line in baseball because remember I told you sports was segregated back in those days. You had something called the Negro Leagues, black only. Sometimes they would say, well, this guy's actually Latin American. He's a dark skin Latin and be able to sneak in through that way, right, through the back door. But even then it was difficult. And as you know, the Latino ball players they're up there. Teoscar Hernandez, Kike Hernandez, Ande Pajes. You know, that's just the Dodgers. You can go on and on and on, right? So La Raza can be very proud of their players. And they, at the same time, have adopted the Japonesa players and even the Korean, right? They have them in the Dodgers because Dodgers for decades now have cultivated the Pacific Rim culture and consciousness, whereas other parts of the country they're still lagging. Right? They don't have the historical, especially if they're outside of the Western states, they don't have the same experience they do with the yellow population, which I'll get into more presently. Okay, but let me finish the story of this one individual who I'm dangling in front of you. He's sort of like the Martin Luther King of professional sports, not just baseball, but baseball in particular. His name's Curt Flood, Flood, like the biblical flood. Curt Flood. He is the individual who sued Bowie Kuhn, Kuhn, he was the commissioner of baseball at the time, for involuntary restraint of trade, anti-monopolistic practices, involuntary servitude. He made Curt Flood made a constitutional issue of it. And eventually, I mean, it went on in the courts, but eventually William Jefferson Clinton signed an act that's called colloquially as the Curt Flood Act, removing baseball from its exemption from monopolistic practices. Now, informally, it's still going on, ladies and gentlemen. And you're going to say, well, how are you going to complain when you're making $700 million or you're Roki Sasaki and you haven't even pitched a single pitch and you're making $325, these are not slaves. But as Curt Flood put it, he was only making that's a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money even today. But for a professional baseball player, it's not a lot. He was getting paid $90,000 a year. He said, well, I'm making $90,000 a year. It's my contract, but I'm still a highly paid slave. And that's the title of his book, Curt Flood. So the point here is that a guy like Curt Flood destroyed his career. He gave up his career to fight for this principle, which is now commonplace. We take it for granted. It's called free agency, free agent, right? So after you reach the term of your original contract, you can renegotiate. And plus you have more and more decision these days on deciding your own fate as a laborer, as a contractor. In the old days, this is where the involuntary servitude comes in. It's a phrase that was used to overturn or provide the constitutional basis for overturning slavery, right? Chattel slavery. And this is recent. I don't know when the Curt Flood Act was signed. It was during the exact year, but it was signed during the administration of Bill Clinton. So let's take a look at this is so important. It's important to our history right now, as tens of thousands of people, as we speak, are being laid off by what were considered to be safe jobs in the American economy. Okay, let's take a look at our friend Curt Flood here. One moment.
In the winter of 1969, for a black man to step up and say, it's unfair what's going on, he risked more than just his career.
And I usually don't speak about the fear that he had, the fear that he was actually going to be killed.
Welcome to our Black History Month special edition Sports Plus. Though Curtis Charles Flood could have been a headline player, the quiet center fielder spent much of his Cardinals career as a complimentary player on maybe the team of the 60s. He got his headlines later and for an entirely different reason. He paid the cost for the riches that players today of all sports enjoy. Curt's struggle that has benefited players of all races is the subject of tonight's Spotlight story produced by Andy Moeller. Curt Flood was at heart an artist, on the field as well as off.
Out on the run, makes the catch. Holy cow! He saved the ball game.
The center fielder for the Cardinals was heralded by Sports Illustrated as baseball's best. He batted behind Hall of Famer Lou Brock, key to Brock's success generating offense.
There's a base hit in the left field. Brock's coming in. Flood's going for two.
Curt had the patience to wait to allow Lou the time to steal the bases. Lou would get on and Curt would get him over to third base after Lou had stolen second base. And lo and behold, we were up 1-0 in so many games in the first inning.
In 1968, he was a part of the defending world champions, the highest paid team in baseball history at the time, making nearly $73,000 a year. He finished 5th in the league in batting and won his 6th consecutive Gold Glove. He also had a thriving art and photography business in St. Louis.
Fly ball, Flood. Hey, almost caught. He misjudges it over his head. 2 runs are going to score.
But the Detroit Tigers pulled a stunning upset, winning the World Series in 7 games.
And they made some comeback. They were trailing 3 games to 1.
The following year, the 31-year-old Flood got into a salary dispute with Cardinals owner Gussie Busch, and his numbers dropped off as the Redbirds finished a disappointing 4th. 5 days after the season ended, Flood was traded to the last-place team, the Phillies, a city with a bad reputation for race relations. Major League players at the time lived under the reserve clause, which bound a player to a team for life or trade. It had been upheld twice previously in the Supreme Court, but the mild-mannered Flood put his foot down and refused to play in Philadelphia, no matter the cost.
The money that's involved is not the important issues here. What I feel inside as a man, and I think are the most important things involved in the situation.
Leaving baseball for a year or two while the case was pending almost certainly meant, given the skill requirements, that he was ending his career with this.
After consulting with players
That is the great Kurt Flood. I remember studying this case in 7th grade. It blew my mind because, I was a baseball fan even back then. So someone like Ohtani Shohei owes his huge contract, or the fact that he's able to leverage it in such a fashion, to pioneers like Kurt Flood, just like all the Dodger fans owe the people who were living in Chavez Ravines a huge debt of gratitude for turning over their homes to the spectator sport. And it doesn't end there. We're going to talk about the third level of applause before we end here. But let's continue here with this discussion here. First of all, let's take a turn towards the internment of my people during World War II. How is it that player development came to a standstill in my community? Well, it's because the kids were taken away and put in a concentration camp for 4 years. And then after the war, they had to focus on getting themselves reestablished financially, economically, and had no time for sports. But sports culture has been a vital part of the immigrant Japanese community from the beginning. They brought it with them to the U.S. and had their own segregated. I participated in one, CYC. Part of the year we played basketball. Part of the year we played baseball. And I even made the papers once. The local Japanese American language paper, the Rafu Shimpo, had a little report because they followed Japanese American sports. They wanted to promote it as part of the community. And I made it there because I hit a triple. It was a complete accident. I don't know. I closed my eyes, I hit it, and the ball went off right down the line. And anyway, I don't know where the clipping is, but that's my claim to baseball immortality. But I remained a fan, especially of people like Suzuki Ichiro. So let's take a look at baseball in the camps during World War II. And then we're going to get to the super mob, I promise you, because the only people that really made out of that episode was Super Mob, Sidney Korshak, his group. Here we go.
Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series this season thanks in large part to superstar Japanese slugger Shohei Ohtani, who is a lock to win another MVP award later this month. In the desert, a few hours north of where Dodger Stadium stands now, Japanese Americans were held in camps during World War II, a dark chapter in American history. In that darkness, prisoners found moments of light in America's national pastime. A few weeks back, a group of their descendants returned to the site to play ball again. NBC's Emily Ikeda has our Sunday Spotlight.
Baseball hasn't been played on this dusty stretch of California desert in some 80 years. But this fall marked its touching and triumphant return. Performing artist Dan Kwong spearheaded a push to restore the baseball field at this former Japanese incarceration camp in Manzanar, now a National Historic Site.
I think of all the spirits who played on this field 80 some years ago. And I feel like we're here to honor them.
Including his mother. She was among the more than 125,000 incarcerated during World War II, seen as a security threat. Innocent Japanese American families lost their homes, businesses, and most of their belongings. But baseball was one thing they got to keep.
There's a quote on the sign over there by a guy named Takeo Suo. Putting on a baseball uniform was like wearing the American flag. You could take a group of people, take away everything they have, The way the Japanese American community responded was, we're going to live life. We're going to build gardens. We're going to make music. We're going to play baseball.
After months of sawing and sanding, the commemorative doubleheader drew athletes spanning 3 generations. 23-year-old Logan Morita was the first player up to bat, following in the footsteps of his family and Japanese Americans across all 10 incarceration camps from years before. Did you?
Well, I get the idea. By the way, some of those films were made by a fellow. His name was Dave Tatsuno, who sent me a small, really nice letter once because I had sent him some material or a book, I believe it was. And he managed to smuggle one of those. He was I think he was a professional photographer before the war, still photographer, but I think he also, it was rare in those days, ladies and gentlemen, in case you don't know, to have a movie camera. You had to have some money or be really devoted to the craft. But he was able to sneak it in there, and that's how they got some of that footage there. So I wanted to talk about, as I alluded to at the top of this presentation, about the super mob and how they intersect with my people. The subtitle is How Sidney Korshak and His Criminal Associates Became America's Hidden Power Brokers. Super mob, hidden power brokers. And it's true today, 2025. These are the individuals who are pulling the strings of Mark Levin, or these other, or Laura Loomer. These are the professional, well, Professor Norman Finkelstein calls them the Holocaust industry, right? This is an excellent book of his, published years ago, which I got right off the press. I got it nearby here, Tower Records and Bookstore. I saw it on the stacks at Holocaust Industry, Norman Finkelstein. All right, to literature. And by the way, our friend Alan Dershowitz went out of his way because Finkelstein embarrassed him in a debate. He went out of his way to make sure that Finkelstein did not get tenure. I think it was at Notre Dame University. I think he did finally get a job someplace. But that's how Supermob plays, you dig? They play for keeps. But you know what? So do the yellow people. We play for keeps too. So I want my money back. Here we go. Gus Russo, what does he have to say? He spends several pages, a section, about how Supermob went into real estate locally, whether it's in California, Chicago. It all comes out of the Chicago mob. Al Capone, Lou Wasserman, Jules Stein. You've heard me talk about these guys already. But they finally migrated to Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Most of you know the story. And they were the developers. They're the ones who wanted to kick out the Mexicans and build Chavez Ravine, just like they're the ones who burned down Pacific Palisades. Not the Chinamen. Super mob. All right? So there's a whole section here. It's called The Rape of the Nisei. Nisei is the second generation Japanese American. That would be my parents, are Nisei. Their parents were born in Japan or Okinawa. They're born in America. They're U.S. citizens. I'm third, or in certain cases, in my grandmother's side, fourth generation of this. But we were unable to become a super mob, even if we aspired to it, because of something called World War II, where all our shit was stolen from us by super mob. According to Gus Russo, it took Gus Russo to educate me about my own history. So you can understand why I'm so passionate about this book. Thank you, Gus Russo. If you are still with us, I thank you for the bottom of my heart for investing so much time and effort in your life to documenting meticulously. He's got the receipts and everything talking about how the super mob stole our real estate, our hotels, our homes, our holdings. They confiscated during World War II as enemy property, enemy alien property. And remember, because of congressional legislation that did not allow my grandparents' citizenship, which made them ineligible to vote, we had no political recourse to this. And if we went to go see the attorneys, like Sidney Court, he was a lawyer, just like the guy named David Basil, and he was a lawyer. They're all attorneys. They were allowed to get into law school, get educated, because they were on the right side of the color line. If they had been classified as Orientals, then they would have been excluded from the schools and they would have been barred from gaining citizenship. Right? But still within the confines of their times, they had to turn to I'm not saying had to, but they turned to criminality in order to advance themselves as a group, the super mob. So the point of this here is not just to revisit an episode of the past and to express resentment over it, although I harbor a great deal of it, especially since I see the descendants of the same people running the same extortion racket on the American people and the world population as well. That's where I'm coming from in 2025. That's why I'm revisiting here, not because of my individual ethnic hurt. Do you understand? And most people, co-religionists of super mob, would agree with me because they're in a minority of the larger group. They're the criminal minority that give the rest of them bad reputation. And according, if I could read into Leo Zagami's work, they are Sabbatean. So there's no other explanation. There's a metaphysical explanation. I think it's a Sabbatean one. Anyway, this whole section here, and maybe I should make a PDF since this book is no longer available and share it with you on my Patreon so you could read this. If you're a student, you can use this as a basis for a paper. And the point here is to make sure that in 2025, your community, your people, we as Americans are not dispossessed again in 2025 in the coming economic crisis that's being engineered as we speak. Do you understand? We've got to get in front of all these problems by reading the history of dispossession. And this happened to my people. It's personal. They froze the assets of my people, U.S. Treasury. They went into Little Tokyo where the Ohtani mural was made. Right. And then shortly after that, they got rid of the Mexicans from Chavez Ravine and they put their baseball stadium in there. And do you think the ownership is Latino? Do you think there are any yellow people who own the Dodgers? No, the only non-white owner of the Dodgers, and he has a small percentage, is Magic Johnson. The Magic, more power to you, Magic Man. But I want it all. All right, so they got 4 actually. Haesung Kim and maybe more players coming on the fight, but 3 major ones, right? Yamamoto, Ohtani, Sasaki. You've got 3 superstar yellow bodies, but they make tons of money, but they have no ownership equity in the Doyers. And neither does Teoscar Hernandez or Kiki Hernandez, Enrique. We call him Kike Hernandez. Or Miguel Rojas. Oh my God. Did you see him hit that home run? He's 36 years old. He was the last person you would imagine hitting a home run. Miguel Rojas, as he's introduced by the stadium announcer at Dodger Stadium. Yeah, hopefully he'll be back next year. And he's on his way to becoming a manager of an MLB team. But the real clap will happen for me when ownership is established by either a black, brown, or a yellow player. You got it? Super Mob has got to start sharing the wealth, right? Larry Fink is not going to own the world. Neither is Alex Karp. You can forget it. We know the history. We know the metaphysics. We know about Sabbateanism and Frankism. We know that it leads to ruin. It leads successively to the destruction of the temple over and over again, biblically, historically. So work with us. Let's work together, as we know Wynonie Harris once said, work together. All right. So anyway, I'm not going to go through the specifics here. I think what I'll do is just make a PDF of that and share it with you on my Patreon that all of you are welcome to partake of, so that we can prepare ourselves intellectually for the rug pull, the economic rug pull it's underway right now, right? The super mob tactics have changed, right? They've changed. They've gone into Wall Street, high finance, white collar type of manipulation. But it's still very much with it. The mentality of screwing over as many people as you can and taking it all for yourself is still very much with us. By all the groups, by the way, not just Super Mob. Super Mob will collaborate with whoever's a big baller there, right? That's the beauty of both Major League Baseball and gangster type activity, is that if you are a performer, if you're an earner, you will get a seat at the table, but you're not going to get a seat if you're a square, right? If you're a civilian, if you're just a dope, a sucker, right? Anyway, let's continue. Let's look at our friend Sidney Korshak. One of the reasons why he came to the fore was because the first generation wise guys were rough around the edges. They still might have had a little bit of an old world accent. They didn't have the necessary refinement. They didn't have the education that their sons did. People like Bazelon or Sidney Korshak in this case. And he's a good looking man. He was tall, slender, suave, debonair. He knew how to talk to people. He knew how to hold his wine glass. But he was smart and he was crooked. So here he is, our friend. By the way, I hope you detect a certain level of respect from how I approach these characters, including Mr. Sidney Korshak. Right, it goes back to my childhood when I got to meet Mickey Cohen. If you don't know who Mickey Cohen is, you don't really know your gangster history of America. My dad bought property from him. Mickey Cohen lived amongst other yellows and Mexicans in East LA. I told you, he grew up in East LA, Mickey Cohen. And I got to visit him at his Beverly Hills mansion. It was more like an apartment, but he ran LA. Okay, and my dad had a type of, he was a landscape contractor. So we would go into the homes of these gangsters. They had tons of money and they liked to live in a nice environment, and they like to have gardening and landscaping and beautiful plants, and because a lot of them were poor, so they were living the life. They were getting tons of cash money, and they would splurge, and they would buy little nice gardens and paradises, mini paradises for their wives, who most of them stayed at home and raised the kids. And when my dad would take me to these jobs, I would play with those kids. They're kids because we were kids. We'd play. So I got to see how the wealthy mobsters up in Beverly Hills and Brentwood and Malibu, how they lived. That's not how we lived. And it didn't bother me, by the way. I just thought it was a different neighborhood. Wait, here's how Korshak lived.
Welcome to Real Music History and Real Sports History. I'm your host, Ryan O. Today's video is part of our resource guide. It's a video bibliography and will be an important resource to refer back to in many of our videos only on patreon.com. These men often pulled the strings of the visible power brokers. Although they remain nameless to the public, they were notorious among a smattering of enterprising investigators who, over decades, followed their brilliant, amoral, and frequently criminal careers. The late Senate investigator and author Walter Sheridan dubbed them the super mob. For all their power, this covert cadre of men had a surprisingly monolithic pedigree. They shared an ancestral lineage traceable from the former Russian-mandated Jewish ghetto known as the Pale of Settlement, emigrating first to the Maxwell Street Lawndale sections of Chicago, and ultimately to what could be termed the Third Settlement, Beverly Hills, California. While they were nomadic to the degree that they followed the money, from Lakeshore Drive to the Vegas Strip to Beverly Hills, the supermob largely succeeded in creating better and more legitimate lives for their offspring. In the process, they became quintessential capitalists, exerting such far-flung influence that the repercussions were felt by practically every American of their era, with an economic impact that could only be measured in the trillions of dollars. Through deniable, often arm's-length associations with the roughneck Italian and Irish mobsters imprinted in the popular imagination, the supermob and the hood shared a sense of entitlement regarding tax-free income. This quote-unquote kosher nostra stressed brains over brawn and evolved into a real estate powerhouse, an organized labor autocracy, and a media empire. If power does indeed corrupt, then the supermob corrupted absolutely. Through methodically nurtured political ties, the supermob effectively insulated itself from prosecution. They were above the law. They had names like Korshak, Arvey, Greenberg, Pritzker, and Zifrin. Within this supermob, Jake Arvey was the visionary kingmaker, the patriarchal Chicago ward boss who inspired his own young wards. Prodigies like Sid Korshak, the sphinx-like operator who quietly kept the wheels of the enterprise greased, or Alex Louis Greenberg, Paul Zifrin, and the others who plunged into stealthy entrepreneurships that made up the engine of this hidden economy. Although they propelled the making of the movies we watched, the music we listened to, the politicians we voted for, and the hotels and resorts we frequented, it is a testament to their genius that most Americans never heard of any of them. Supermob. Cast of characters. Antonio Leonardo Accardo, 1906 to 1992, aka Tony, Joe Batters, and the Big Tuna. Served as boss of Chicago's Outfit, the most powerful underworld cartel in U.S. history for over 6 decades in the 20th century. A major force in national bookmaking, labor racketeering, the Teamsters Pension Fund, and Las Vegas casino gambling. Accardo treated Sid Korshak like a son. Jacob, Jake or Jack, Arvey, 1895 to 1977. Chicago-born attorney, political kingmaker who built one of the most powerful patronage machines in America. He served as a mentor to many of Chicago's most well-connected Jewish attorneys, and as a crucial vote deliverer for Democratic presidents such as FDR, Truman, and JFK. Key early supporter of the State of Israel. David Lionel Bazelon, 1909 to 1993. Chicago tax attorney, originally in law firms with college buddy Paul Zifrin, but left private practice to become Truman's assistant attorney general in charge of the lands division, a position.
There you go. Harry S. Truman from Missouri. Another crook. I mean, politician crook. I mean, that's a redundancy, right? See how it intersects with the history? And just think, little me, I'm part of that history, but I was on the receiving buggered end of the history. No more. Okay, that stops. We're not listening to Mark Levin or Laura Loomer no more. Do you understand? Because I'm going to start my own music, entertainment, movie, alternative media empire. Me, the Yellow Godfather, right? And it's going to be built on 2 legs. I'm looking for the third. It's a triad. But one's going to be porno and the other part's going to be gambling. You bring porno and gambling together, and I think you have the beginnings of a highly lucrative business model that will survive the coming crash. All right. I'm only being partly serious, I hope you know here. I'm just sort of burlesquing what I've been reading for the past several decades of my teaching and research career. Right. And the last phase of it, as I've already alluded to, is to talk about the ascendancy of Yeller people, the Huang people, the Yellers, in the criminalization of the American economy. And we're there already. So if any of you out there need a consigliere, or someone who can help conceptualize the new economy, please contact me here in the comments. For those of you who just want to repeat 30, 40-year information about the Illuminati or the Freemasons or whatever else you learned on YouTube, don't bother me. Okay, I'm serious here. Right, we're in a postgraduate level of understanding here. You can watch Candace Owens if you need the training wheels still, or you can watch, Russell Brand or some of these other characters. But we're way beyond that. Okay, we're beyond the entertainment phase. We're looking for some workarounds here. We're looking for some solutions. I'm talking to the future Sidney Korshaks out there watching this motivational talk of mine. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for today, except let's see how they celebrate the Dodgers in Japan.
Few years, the Dodgers have gained a whole new demographic of fans, both here in Southern California and halfway around the world. CBS LA's Rina Nakano is in Little Tokyo with the team's enthusiastic Japanese.
I have a better one for you.
Fans packed sports bar in Shibuya to watch the historic moment. Japanese fans were there to see which team will win the world's top title. They were watching Game 7 of the World Series between the Dodgers and the Blue Jays, held in Toronto, Canada. When Dodgers clinched victory, cheers erupted. Extra newspapers were handed out in Tokyo.
最初だけ家で見てたんですけど、ちょっと出かける予定があったので、あとはずっとネットで追いかけてました。日本人のこのスーパースターが2人も3人もいて、世界で戦っているのを見て感動しました。
Locals were thrilled about the Dodgers' comeback win.
朝見てきて、でちょうど負けてるとこだったんで、ちょっとランチ終わって今これもらってびっくりしました。大谷選手と山本選手と佐々木朗希選手、応援してましたので嬉しいです。
The excitement carried over to the next day as young players in Tokyo practiced. They were trying to imitate Yamamoto Yoshinobu's pitching mechanics. Customers were queuing to enter a supermarket in Saitama Prefecture. They were here for the Dodgers victory sale. They sold eggs, normally sold for 289 yen, for 108 yen for customers who wore blue. $200 cases of eggs were sold out in about 2 hours. Even households joined the Dodgers fever.
69円だ。安いよね。ね。ほら優勝したからじゃん。大谷さんが活躍したから頑張ってますよね。誇りですよね。
Baseball fans.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We ran it back all the way down to the World War II, the Pacific War, through the post-war period, 1950s, to the 60s, all the way up to the second decade of the 21st century. Thank you very much for your subscription. Follow me on Patreon. And let me remind you before I sign off, we're going to have an incredible conversation. I'm reading the book. I'm almost done with it. But we're going to have an incredible conversation with Leo Zagami next Sunday. And I encourage you to pick up the book if you can. But even if you're unable to, come into the live chat. I'm going to try to save a few minutes at the end for your questions. Anything that you might have on your mind that you want to clarify. He's the expert in the field. We have a unique opportunity to find out his interpretive scheme and what this bodes for the future. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. We're going to get through this and prevail. We're going to triumph over this impending engineered chaos. All right. Thank you very much. Peace. Catch you next Sunday, God willing. Bye.